In the fog-choked streets of Victorian London, amid the poverty and shadows of Whitechapel, a name was etched into history with blood. Jack the Ripper, a phantom killer whose identity remains one of the greatest mysteries in true crime. The terror began in August 1888, when the body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered in Bucks Row. Her throat had been slashed twice, and her abdomen brutally mutilated. Just a week later, Annie Chapman was found in a backyard on Hanbury Street. Her body bore even more grotesque injuries. Her womb had been removed, signaling something more than just random violence. It was calculated, surgical. But the horror wasn't over. On the night of September 30th, London saw a chilling escalation. In what's known as the double event, two women, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, were murdered within an hour of each other. Stride's wounds were less severe, leading some to believe the Ripper was interrupted. But Eddowes' body was found savagely mutilated in Mitre Square, her face slashed, and her kidney removed. Then, the final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was discovered on November 9, in her room at Miller's Court. Her murder was the most horrific of all. The Ripper had time. He eviscerated her body with such brutality that even seasoned detectives were shaken. She was virtually unrecognizable. What set Jack the Ripper apart was not just the savagery of the crimes, but the apparent medical knowledge behind them. The killer seemed to know how to remove organs quickly and precisely, leading many to suspect a doctor, surgeon, or butcher. The media frenzy was fueled by letters sent to police and newspapers, signed, Jack the Ripper. Whether these were hoaxes or truly written by the killer is still debated. One letter, dubbed the Dear Boss letter, was the first to use the infamous name. Another, known as the From Hell letter, was mailed with half a human kidney, allegedly from one of the victims. Despite countless theories, ranging from royal conspiracies to insane doctors, the Ripper was never caught. The police interviewed hundreds, detained dozens, and yet the killer vanished into the night, leaving behind only corpses, fear, and questions. Over 130 years later, Jack the Ripper remains the ghost of Whitechapel, a spectre of evil whose crimes haunt both history books and dark imaginations. In the peaceful English town of Soham, Cambridgeshire, the summer of 2002 would become a season marked by tragedy and national sorrow. On the warm afternoon of August 4, 2002, 10-year-old best friends Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman left a family barbecue to buy some sweets. They were last seen wearing matching Manchester United football shirts, smiling and carefree. When they didn't return home, their families panicked. What followed was one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in British history. For nearly 2 weeks, police, volunteers, and media searched desperately. Posters lined the streets. Press conferences were held. The entire country held its breath. Then, on August 17, 2 decomposed bodies were found in a ditch near an airbase at Lakenheath in Suffolk, about 10 miles from Soham. The remains were soon confirmed to be Holly and Jessica. The innocence of a community had been shattered. Attention quickly turned to Ian Huntley, the school caretaker at Soham Village College. Huntley had previously spoken to police and even appeared on television, claiming he had seen the girls walk past his house the day they vanished. But inconsistencies began to surface. Alongside him was his partner, Maxine Carr, a teaching assistant who had worked in Holly and Jessica's class. She provided an alibi for Huntley, saying they were together the entire evening. However, it later emerged she had been out of town that weekend. She had lied to protect him. On August 20, Ian Huntley was arrested and charged with the murders of both girls. Maxine Carr was charged with perverting the course of justice and assisting an offender. The trial began in November 2003 at the Old Bailey. The prosecution laid out a chilling narrative. On the day of the disappearance, Huntley had lured Holly and Jessica into his home, possibly under the pretense that Maxine was inside. Once they were in, he murdered them, though his exact motive has never been fully understood. Huntley claimed one of the girls had died in a panic-induced accident, and the other when he tried to silence her. The jury rejected his version. On December 17, 2003, Huntley was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to 2 life terms, with a minimum term of 40 years, effectively a whole life order. Maxine Carr was found guilty of perverting the course of justice and served 21 months in prison before being released with a new identity for her protection. The Soham murders sparked widespread public outrage and led to sweeping reforms in how background checks are carried out on people working with children in the UK. It was revealed that Huntley had a disturbing history of sexual relationships with underage girls and previous allegations of rape and violence, yet he had slipped through the cracks. The case is remembered not only for the unimaginable pain suffered by the families, but also for the deep breach of trust. A school caretaker, someone expected to protect children, had instead committed one of the most horrific crimes in modern British history. To this day, the memory of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman remains a symbol of stolen innocence and the urgent need to protect the vulnerable from those who hide in plain sight. On the morning of April 26, 1999, one of Britain's most beloved television personalities was gunned down on her doorstep in a crime that sent shockwaves through the nation. Her name was Jill Dando, a respected journalist, television presenter, and co-host of the BBC's flagship crime show, Crime Watch. Jill, then 37 years old, was returning to her home in Fulham, West London. As she approached her front door, in broad daylight, a man crept up behind her. With chilling precision, he held a 9mm handgun to her head and fired a single shot into her left temple. The bullet passed through her brain and exited her head. Jill collapsed instantly. A neighbor found her minutes later, slumped on her doorstep. The killing bore the hallmarks of an execution, not a robbery or random act of violence. There were no signs of a struggle, and her handbag remained untouched. For a nation used to seeing Jill's warm and trustworthy face on television, the brutal nature of her death was unthinkable. The Metropolitan Police launched a massive investigation, Operation Oxborough. Over 2,500 people were interviewed, more than 1,000 cars were examined, and countless leads were pursued. Theories swirled. Was it a jealous stalker? A random lunatic? A professional hit? In May 2000, over a year after her death, the police arrested Barry George, a local man with a history of mental health issues and previous convictions for stalking women. He lived less than half a mile from Jill's home and had a fascination with celebrities. The case against him was largely circumstantial. A speck of firearm discharge residue was found in his coat pocket. Prosecutors argued it tied him to the shooting. In 2001, Barry George was convicted of Jill Dando's murder and sentenced to life in prison. But from the beginning, doubts lingered. There was no direct forensic evidence, no witness linking him to the crime scene, and the gun residue could have come from many sources. After years of appeals, in 2007, the conviction was quashed by the Court of Appeal. A retrial was ordered, and in August 2008, Barry George was found not guilty. He had spent 8 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. With the case reopened, investigators were once again left with more questions than answers. Over the years, several theories have emerged. That she was murdered by a disgruntled stalker. That her work on Crime Watch led to a revenge killing by a criminal she helped expose. That she may have been the target of a Serbian hit squad, angered by her charity work with Kosovan refugees during the NATO bombings in the Balkans. Or perhaps, it was a random act by an unknown lone gunman. But despite exhaustive investigations and media speculation, no one else has ever been charged, and the case remains officially unsolved. Today, the murder of Jill Dando stands as one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in British history. A warm, compassionate woman who dedicated her life to helping others was taken in a moment of senseless violence. Her legacy endures through the Jill Dando Institute of Crime Science, established in her memory, to prevent future crimes and seek justice for victims, just as she had always done. On the night of April 22, 1993, in the South London suburb of Eltham, 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence, a black British teenager with dreams of becoming an architect, was waiting for a bus with his friend, Dwayne Brooks. What happened next would not only end a young life, but expose the deep-rooted racism and systemic failures of British institutions. As Stephen stood near a bus stop, a group of white youths approached. In an unprovoked and brutal attack, 5 or 6 white men set upon him. Witnesses later reported that they hurled racist abuse before stabbing Stephen twice, once in the chest and once in the shoulder, with such force that the blade severed major arteries. Despite his injuries, Stephen managed to run over 100 yards before collapsing and bleeding to death on the pavement. He died just minutes later. He had no weapons, no gang ties, just the wrong skin color in the wrong place. From the very beginning, the police investigation was deeply flawed. Within days, names of suspects, Neil and Jamie Acorte, Gary Dobson, David Norris, and Luke Knight, were being circulated in the local community and even handed to police in anonymous tip-offs. Yet no arrests were made, no homes were searched, and crucial evidence was either missed or mishandled. Stephen's parents, Doreen and Neville Lawrence, refused to let their son's death be ignored. They launched a tireless campaign for justice, accusing the Metropolitan Police of institutional racism, an accusation that would later be proven right. In 1997, after the Crown Prosecution Service declined to prosecute due to insufficient evidence, the Lawrences pursued a private prosecution against 3 suspects. But it collapsed in court. The turning point came in 1999, with the publication of the Macpherson Report, following a public inquiry ordered by Home Secretary Jack Straw. The report concluded that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racist, marking one of the most significant moments in British legal and civil rights history. It made 70 recommendations to reform policing, including stronger hate crime legislation and better diversity training. In 2011, thanks to advances in forensic science, new evidence emerged. A blood stain belonging to Stephen was found on the collar of suspect Gary Dobson's jacket, and a hair belonging to Stephen was discovered on the clothing of David Norris. They were arrested again. In January 2012, nearly 19 years after the murder, Gary Dobson and David Norris were convicted of Stephen Lawrence's murder and sentenced to life in prison. The other suspects remain unconvicted. The case remains officially open, with hopes that new evidence or testimony might one day bring the remaining killers to justice. Stephen Lawrence's death became a national reckoning, a symbol of the failures of the justice system and the lived reality of racial injustice in the UK. His legacy lives on through the Stephen Lawrence Day Foundation, and through his mother, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, who continues to advocate for equality and police reform. What happened to Stephen Lawrence was not just a tragedy, it was a turning point in modern British history, exposing truths that many had long endured but few in power had acknowledged. On July 9, 1996, a peaceful summer afternoon in the quiet village of Chillenden, Kent, became the backdrop for one of the most brutal and chilling crimes in modern British history, the Russell murders. That day, Dr. Lynn Russell, a 45-year-old mother and educational psychologist, was walking home from a school swimming gala with her 2 young daughters, Megan, aged 6, and Josie, aged 9, along a quiet country lane. They were accompanied by their family dog, Lucy. But they never made it home. As they walked through a wooded path, they were ambushed by a man wielding a hammer. What followed was a savage and inexplicable act of violence. The attacker bound all 3 victims with torn strips of towel and blindfolded them. Then, one by one, he bludgeoned them with the hammer, inflicting devastating injuries to their heads. Megan, Lynn, and even their dog Lucy were murdered at the scene. Josie, though left for dead, miraculously survived, though with life-threatening injuries and memory loss. She was found hours later, barely alive, and later underwent surgery that saved her life. The community was horrified. A mother and her 2 innocent daughters had been targeted in broad daylight, with no clear motive. The police launched a massive investigation, searching for answers in a crime that seemed totally random. After more than a year of public pressure and growing frustration, the focus fell on Michael Stone, a heroin addict with a long criminal record and a history of mental illness and violent behavior. He had no direct connection to the Russell family, but he was known in the area and had reportedly made disturbing comments about harming people with a hammer. Stone was arrested in 1997 and put on trial in 1998. The key evidence against him, a supposed confession he made to a fellow inmate while in custody. There was no forensic evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, and no eyewitness identification. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Michael Stone was convicted of the murders of Lynn and Megan Russell, and the attempted murder of Josie Russell. He was sentenced to 3 life terms, with a minimum of 25 years. However, the case has remained controversial. The reliability of the jailhouse confession has been widely questioned, especially as the main witness later retracted and changed his story multiple times. The case has had 2 trials and multiple appeals. In 2001, a retrial was held, and Stone was convicted again, largely based on the same prison testimony. He continues to maintain his innocence to this day. In recent years, attention has turned to a potential alternative suspect, Levi Belfield, a convicted serial killer responsible for the murders of Millie Dowler, Marsha McDonnell, and Amelie Delagrange. Belfield allegedly confessed in 2022 to the Russell murders, providing disturbing details that matched facts from the crime scene. However, no formal charges have been brought, and police have not confirmed his confession as credible evidence. Meanwhile, Josie Russell, the sole survivor, went on to make an extraordinary recovery. Despite her severe injuries and the unimaginable trauma of losing her mother and sister, she rebuilt her life and became a successful artist. Her strength and resilience have become a powerful symbol of survival and hope. The Russell murders remain a deeply painful and unresolved chapter in Britain's criminal history. Questions still linger. Was the right man convicted? Or is a brutal child killer still being denied justice? For many, the case represents both the fragility of justice and the enduring pain left in the wake of senseless violence. On August 19, 1987, the small English market town of Hungerford, Berkshire, was shaken to its core by one of the most horrific mass shootings in British history. The perpetrator was Michael Ryan, a 27-year-old unemployed labourer and gun enthusiast. He lived a quiet, solitary life with his mother and had developed a fascination with firearms, military gear, and violent fantasy. But no one could have predicted the carnage he would unleash. That morning began like any other, but by the end of the day, 16 people were dead, including Ryan himself, and 15 more were injured. The massacre would prompt sweeping changes in British gun laws and leave an indelible scar on a peaceful community. It started around 12:30 p.m., when Michael Ryan entered Savernake Forest, just outside Hungerford. There, he shot and killed Susan Godfrey, a mother of two, while she was picnicking with her children. He tied her up and shot her at close range. Her children escaped unharmed. From there, Ryan drove back to Hungerford, armed with a Beretta 9mm pistol, a semi-automatic Norinco Type 56 rifle, and an M1 carbine, all legally owned under UK firearm regulations at the time. He wore combat clothing and carried hundreds of rounds of ammunition. At approximately 12:50 p.m., he began a random shooting spree in the town. He shot people in cars, on the street, and in their homes. Among his victims were neighbors, strangers, and even his own family. He returned to the house he shared with his mother, Dorothy Ryan, whom he shot and killed before setting the house on fire. He then continued on foot through the town, calmly and methodically shooting at anyone he encountered. Victims included police officer Roger Brereton, who was ambushed in his patrol car, and Abdul Khan, a father shot in front of his family. Panic spread quickly. As emergency services struggled to respond, Hungerford residents barricaded themselves indoors. Police evacuated parts of the town and tried to contain Ryan's movements. Eventually, Ryan made his way to John O'Gaunt Community School, where he had once been a student. By early evening, he had barricaded himself inside, alone, surrounded by police. Negotiators attempted to communicate with him. In his final hours, Ryan said very little, except to express confusion about his actions, saying, "I wish I had stayed in bed." Around 6:52 p.m., he shot himself in the head. The massacre was over. In total, 16 people were killed, including his own mother. 15 others were seriously injured. The youngest victim was 14, the oldest in their 60s. Most of the victims were ordinary residents going about their daily lives, mothers, fathers, retirees, and local workers. The Hungerford massacre horrified the nation. There had never been a modern mass shooting in the UK on such a scale. In the immediate aftermath, questions were raised about gun control laws, mental health, and police preparedness. In 1988, just a year later, the UK government passed the Firearms Amendment Act, which banned semi-automatic rifles and significantly tightened gun ownership regulations. The legislation was seen as a direct response to the failings exposed by Hungerford. A subsequent police inquiry found numerous communication issues, including delayed response and difficulty coordinating between emergency services. These failures led to reforms in how police and emergency services handle mass casualty incidents. Michael Ryan's motive remains unclear to this day. He left no suicide note, and his background revealed no history of criminal violence. Some psychiatrists believe he may have suffered from paranoid schizophrenia or a delusional disorder, but no formal diagnosis was ever made.